about open source. So Samson, the floor is yours. You can unmute your mic and speak. Thank you for joining.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Is it necessary to turn on my video? I'm just curious.
Whatever works for you. Well, I think we prefer a video, but whatever works for you is fine too.
Okay. My room is a bit messy, but that's fine. Hi everybody. Good evening. I'm sorry. This is not my normal behavior. I'm supposed to be here way early, but then I had some emergency I needed to take care of last minute. So but yeah, the goal today was to come and talk about like a bunch of things, but I think I want this section to be as much interactive as possible. So the goal here is to, if you have any questions directly, because I'm sure like there's nothing new I would say that you probably wouldn't heard, like, probably what is open source, ways to do it. But rather, if you have something more specific you want me to address, that's the goal here. But just to kind of give you guys a bio and a kind of an overview of who I am for some of you that might be meeting me for the first time. My name is Samson. I am the co-founder for Open Source Community Africa, which is an organization that I co-founded with Ada Nduka from ChainGuard Africa. So initially, the goal was to kind of build a community around people that advocate for open source. But down the line, we realized that talking about open source isn't much of what we wanted to do, but we wanted to push a lot of effort, including projects, right? So we started not just advocating for ideas, but also working with organizations that we partner with to give opportunities for people that are in Africa. So we're looking at the ranges from Google or Spell Team, from like, I don't know if some of you have heard about Google's Month Code, Google Coding and Google Season of Docs. That's for people that are writing. And then when you go to the other side of the ecosystem, you're looking at things like outreaches. So those are the things we've been able to do. And then on my day job, I just basically do that well. Sometimes engineering dependent, but I don't actively write code these days. So I'm more on the strategy side. So I don't know if anyone has any question here for me or anything they've always wanted to ask me in terms of what is open source and how can they expand their career in open source technical writing, in this case, helping to improve open source talks. I'm sorry if I'm speaking too fast. I kind of have the habit of doing that. How do we enter this open source thing? So there's no door to enter. If that's okay, I'll try to speak a bit slow. Well, there's no door to enter. Like, it's not like something you can just go and study, boot camp, like you do like software engineering or design. I mean, except you're trying to do something real detailed, like basically my job, that you can potentially like want to go through some, studies or whatever. But then in terms of contributing to open source, which is what I think you're asking, is just basically identifying the skill set you want to do and then identify the open source project you intend to contribute to. It could be a project in terms of, let's say, for example, you're a software engineer and you use React, which is the most popular JavaScript framework, and then you want to contribute to the React community. So there are multiple ways you can contribute to the React community, and one of those ways could be that you're contributing back by writing code to the organization, or you're working on writing documentations for people to see and to know how to use React. Right? And there are a lot of ways you can do that. It's either you help to update the documentations that are on GitHub itself, or you use your blogging platform or the platforms you use to write, and then you just educate people about how React looks like. And at the end of the day, you're all contributing back to the React project, or you go to conferences and you go to speak about React. Or in this case, by using React means you're contributing to open source, because one of the things that most people don't talk about a lot is that by using an open source project or by using open source itself, you're contributing to it specifically. So that's kind of the way that you can easily get into open source. I see if I mentioned, I tried doing open source contribution during Oktoberfest, but I was totally lost. I really need a practical guide on how to get started. I don't think there's a defined practical guide. I'll just probably drop a link right now. Just give me a second. So there's a popular link I always refer people to. It's called opensource.guide. It's very good, mostly updated, and I think it's posted on GitHub. So I'm just gonna drop a link here. So if you go to opensource.guide for people that are watching online, again, like I said, it's posted on GitHub. There's literally a section called how to contribute to open source, right? That is very, very detailed and a way that you can basically identify what you want to contribute. So there are ways that you can contribute to a project, and there's a way you can create a project. So it's kind of a two-way thing. So I would advise you, if I need to take a look at that link, and you can see more detailed way of how to contribute to open source. I see Christina. She said something about, I'm guessing it's a she. I'm sorry if I misrepresent your gender. Said, must you be a developer to work in an open source space? Not really. I'm saying not really because some projects are very developers focused, because most of them are all tailored to engineering, but then they are, again, just like any life cycle of software development or building apps, there are multiple touch points, right? There's the research part, there's the product level side, there's the design element side, and then obviously there's the coding part, and then there's the marketing part of it. Like, so your typical company strategy, right? The same life cycle, the product would go down to production and also to consumers. This kind of ideas flow in an open source project. So it's just for you to identify what are the things that you want to do. Yes, why there's a preference for software engineers, meaning that other skill sets can contribute. Again, you just have to follow the organization that you intend to contribute, and then you follow the docs, because each organizations have different ways to contribute to their project. So typically when you go to github.com and then you identify a project that you want to contribute, all you need to do is to look out for a contributor and contributing.md file. It's usually where you see the guidelines on how to contribute, or you find a chat channel on ways that you can contribute, and you can ask questions, and then they're obviously going to answer. So these are the kind of an easy, and so this is kind of an easy, somebody said my audio cut off. Can you all still hear me? I don't know if it's me or if it's Abraham. Can you all still hear me? Or is my audio still funny?
Yes, you can.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so like I said, right, all probably the way you can get into open source is obviously through that link, opensource.guide/how to contribute. And it's very detailed on how you can contribute in multiple skill sets. So it's not just engineering alone. Someone said, can a technical writer contribute to open source, and how? Yes. Again, like I said, it's the same process. Again, I'm referencing that link, but then a practical way to do that is, let me see if I can share my screen. 1 second. Share my screen. If I can log in. So a practical way to do that, I'm referencing GitHub because GitHub is a place where a lot of open source projects have been hosted on. So let me see if I can share my screen quickly. Okay, can you see my screen? I'm guessing you can. So yeah, typically, I'm sure you probably know what GitHub is. So the shortcut way to explore things is just to go to github.com/explore. Again, that link has the stuff. So there you can able to see projects in multiple ways. You can either do exploring, and exploring meaning that you can see basically what's going on, like what is the most trending repository to contribute to at this point. You can see that. You can see people that are trending individually. You can see multiple things, right? And then in terms of topics, this is very interesting on GitHub. Like you can basically narrow things down to what you're looking for. If you're an engineer, like I said, there are a lot of things you can play with here. And then when you click on each of that project, they take you straight to the GitHub repository in this sense, which is this. So for example, like Ajax, there are multiple projects on that there. You can just select which project you want to contribute to. Another cool way to look at is to see trending. So usually you can just see like, oh, what open source project is trending right now, and how can I filter it? You can usually filter based on the language that you write if you're a software engineer, right? Again, like I said, GitHub is not necessarily designed to track those non-code contributions, but the typical way I would explore an open source project is to do something like this. So I contribute to a project called Sugar Labs, right? So I'm searching right now on Sugar Labs, and I go to the Sugar environment, right? And then the next thing I'm looking for, let's say, Sugar Dogs, right? Like, which is very specific. Now, remember what I said, right? Every open source project typically would have a way for you to see how to contribute. So here are very detailed steps on how you can contribute to a project. Again, this varies between each project. So I'm using a project that I contribute to. So here you can basically see activities, including improving these documentations. You can see the ways that you can contribute to the project itself. So again, it all depends on what you want to contribute. There's no central point on things you want to do, if that makes sense. Somebody asked a question about how can I leverage open source as a cybersecurity analyst. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Again, like I said, if you think that a project doesn't really have your direct skill sets, it's very difficult to just ask around like, hey, I possess the skills. I'm guessing on cybersecurity, are you looking for things like testing the software to see if it's secure? If you have that skill set, I'm sure there are a lot of projects that will probably want to check for vulnerability and see if they're shipping secure software. I would say you should check out a project called Sixdoor. It's pretty cool. That's for the person on cybersecurity. So if you go to github.com/Sixdoor, you're going to see a lot of cybersecurity-based or security-based open source project that you can probably want to contribute to. Yeah. Okay. Seeing someone. Okay. Yeah, I think okay, somebody asked, please. Oh, sure. Sorry, I have to speak fast because of people that I usually talk to. Very sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know. You can also unmute yourself. I don't know. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, but if you want to ask a question directly, you can do that, or you can use the chat. But again, typically, the benefit of contributing to open source is the fact that you can, you can basically improve your career. Like imagine what's going on in today, right? There are less jobs, or in this case, there are a lot of technical skills, or there are a lot of skills, but there are less companies hiring, right? So what that means is that companies are actively seeking for extra skills that you need to possess in order to get a job, right? And typically what that skills mean is that you need to be able to have a lot of ideas on how to collaborate as a person, right? Especially when that job is mostly remote. And these are the kind of skill sets you get by contributing to the open source project, because it's kind of the same way you would work in a remote company. And also a way that you can show your skill that is not covered by an NDA. Now imagine you're working on a project or a contract or something, and then you sign an NDA, and the NDA is telling you not to share or talk about that project. Now imagine you're trying to interview for another company. You know, by the stuff you signed, you're not allowed to talk about what you worked on. But open source, we don't really have that structure there. You just pick up something you want to contribute to, and then you just work on it. Somebody said, what project can a digital marketer contribute to? I'm not quite sure. Again, like I said, I don't really have, there's no breakdown to skill set specifically. It's about what you can do right now. So there's no, what can you do as a title? It's rather than, even as a software engineer, even if you say, oh, how can I contribute as a software engineer? If you're writing Fortran, you don't have to go to JavaScript open source project because they are more focused on JavaScript. So again, it's not about the title, it's about what you can offer as a person. Messi is asking, what is open source? Again, I shared the link for it to be more detailed, but I'll just give you a kind of a summary of what an open source is. So open source as a method is an opportunity for people to get to contribute to something that is open by definition, right? So definition in terms of like a project that is publicly shared and has a license that permits contributors like ourselves to contribute back to the project. So typically what that means is that you have a software, you have an event, you have an event, you have literally things that are defined by the license to say, oh, this is open source. And then all you probably need to do is just to contribute to the project by the guideline I shared, right? So typically that is what open source means, meaning it's open by nature. It's a typical example of an open source project is Android, right? When Android started as an open source project. So what that means is that I think that's going to be the best way I can explain it. So here I'm holding a Samsung phone, right? And this Samsung phone is running an Android operating system, right? That is what it is on this hardware. Now, what is the open source in this thing itself, right? It's basically the operating system here. Now, the operating system, I don't know the updates right now, but as of when I checked the last time, the core of Android itself is based on open source license. So what that means is that the Android project, you as a user or as either a project owner or as a user, you can contribute to Android itself, and Android is owned by Google. So meaning if there's something on Android you think needs to be improved, you can basically you have the opportunity to contribute back to Android, and then those contributions get merged into the Android. And when I mean merged, like what you sent and what is already there get merged together, and then those things get shipped on the phone. So now, why is open source important? Because Android is open source, it gives opportunity for other devices to use Android in their own way. So for example, the way you use Android on Samsung is different from the way you probably use Android on Techno or Infinix. The reason why there are a lot of companies using Android is because Android is open in matter of way, and it allows that. That is why you don't see iOS running on Samsung or something else, if that makes sense.
All right, so you can go ahead with your question. So guys, if you have any question, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. So Chisom.
Somebody asked the question saying, does this mean that any contribution to an open source project is acceptable by the project managers or in their benchmark for selecting contributions? Yeah, like I said, contributing doesn't necessarily, okay, so contributing to an open source project doesn't mean that they would have to accept your project. That is why it takes, the steps I've been talking about is identify what you want to contribute to, regardless of the scale. Read the documentation on that project on how to contribute, and then follow that guideline, basically. That is the easiest way. And then Victoria is saying, what are the limitations of open source when multiple people contribute to it? Can it affect the code and cause bugs? Not really. Again, GitHub is a code hosting platform or a version control online system that basically listens to Git, right? Git is a version control that you can basically manipulate versioning in a way to see, how to version softwares, right? But then GitHub has a structure that is built within or built on top of Git that allows things like basically helping you to project manage, if that makes sense. It's a kind of a project manage tool. So maintainer of that project can basically compare something that someone is contributing and what is already there, and then can see what are the changes and where problems are particularly where problems can particularly arise from, right? And then typically when there are bugs, just like any other place, it is because it's open by nature. It is very easy for someone to identify and see the bug and then work on it, rather than when. So I'll give an example, right? Imagine you're using your iPhone, for example, and then for some reason your camera started acting weird, and you notice that that is something that everybody's using. Now, as a user of the iPhone, you can't contribute to that project, or you can't fix that bug yourself, because the iOS itself is closed source, so you don't have the opportunity to do that. Now, if you're using a software that is open source and you identify a bug, right, you can go and fix the bug yourself and send a pull request to that, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the easiest way I can put that in terms of day-to-day scenarios. There's a question about what are the importance of contributing to open source. Again, I've talked about it at the beginning. I said that it's an opportunity for you to improve your skills and also to get opportunities to get jobs, because a lot of companies identify people that contribute to open source as an extra skills that they probably need, if that makes sense. What are the common projects, open source projects that we can again, I don't know. I don't think there's but the easiest thing I can refer to is, again, go through that documentation. So if you go through that documentation I shared, there are links that are very specific to what you're looking for. But let me just see if I can just see. I think the easiest one is called, 1 second, sorry. The easiest link there is, I think it's called First Time Contributor, but I'll just try to find the link and see if I can share. Yeah, again, try to visit the link and you probably see what I'm referring to. So there's a first timer website that allows anybody can contribute. But again, there's a reason why I shared the link. It's easy, very, very much detail on your own pace to understand what it is and how you can contribute. And any link I'm going to be sharing is definitely coming from that link. So please take a look at it. Chisom is saying, please, this open source, it's sort of a market where, no, it's not. It's a culture. It's a way of doing things in the technology world. So it's not something separate on its own. It's not a marketplace. No, it's not Upwork or whatever. No, it's very different. Except you have something very specific that you want to ask. It's an opportunity to improve your skill. Like by contributing to a project, you can get hired, or you can reference what you contribute to your employers. But it's not a marketplace. Yeah. Someone was yeah.
You can go with your question. Yeah. Rashid.
So I want to ask a question. The question goes for, so what is open source and technical writing? When I'm coming, like here now, I'm a developer. I know that it is very, very key for a developer to also contribute to open source. So that is the coding aspect of it. So when you now say, okay, as a technical writer, what are the things that you will need to do in an open source project for you to?
Oh yeah, I
Do
get
you
it.
get my point?
Yeah, I think I already addressed it, but I was just trying to reiterate again. You can't be a technical writer if you don't understand code. Just to put that there, right? Like you can't write about JavaScript if you don't know what JavaScript is, right? So let's keep that one in check. So if you identify as a technical writer, right, you're not a content writer, you're not somebody that summarizes things, but you want to talk to engineers or talk to developers or talk to whatever, that means you need to understand things around code, right? You don't have to be a software engineer. I'm sure that's what this bootcamp or this programs you're in is about. Now, the fact that you understand code gives you opportunity to be very specific, right? So if you're a technical writer and then you like to write about things, let's say web, right? Like you want to write things about web. In order for you to write stuff about web, you need to understand what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is, right? Because you want to be able to talk about frameworks, you want to be able to demystify stuff. If the company is hiring you as a technical writer, they want you to be able to understand code. That is why it's called technical and not just a writer, right? Now, the fact that you're technical, that means that you have a dependencies that improve your knowledge. Now, the more you contribute to an open source project, now by writing code or by writing about something, it makes you to give, like it basically gives you opportunity to understand that thing very well. So let's say you want to do 100 days of demystifying Django, right? That is your project that you want to write about, right? Now, how do you contribute to open source? Now, by writing about Django for 100 days and sharing it to the community, guess what you're doing? You're sharing knowledge, and that is what open source is, and that's what I was talking about, which is there are many ways you can contribute. You don't have to write the code, but the fact that you're demystifying what Django is to a lot of people, and people are sharing, whether you're doing that on Twitter or you're doing that on your own blog or you're doing that like this, you are contributing to an open source project, because again, Django itself is open source, right? What you're doing there is that you're doing developers education, right? And then two, you're also making people to use Django by understanding what Django is, meaning that it's a win-win situation for you, meaning you're exposing yourself out there for opportunities to get hired because of your experience in Django, but also you're getting people into the Django community because guess what? They are loving your articles and they are definitely want to try out the things that you want them to try. I don't know if that makes sense. So that's kind of the way I would advise you to look at it as a technical writer.
All right, thank you for that, Samson. Somebody asked a question offline.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody asked a question offline that are there any other benefits, like monetary benefits in the future if you're involved in open source or maybe increasing your profile, like that?
In terms of monetary benefits, again, I can't really say. You defined your career as a person. It's a space where you go and hack your way into whatever you want to do, right? So people go there to donate money. Like, for example, I donate to open source project, I donate to communities, if you follow me on Twitter. But also I work on open source. Like I get paid for my job. You know, my job is centered around open source. So that's technically me working on open source, right? Why some careers might not necessarily mean that you're working in open source. For example, being a digital marketer doesn't necessarily mean that you're working in open source, right? But in order to get an opportunity to get hired, you need to somehow show your skill. How are you showing your skill? By contributing to a project. Again, the documentation is very detailed on how to do that, right? Now, if you want to be specific about making money, you either want to get a job, which is you're already prepping yourself to get a job, or you can go through boot camps, right? So there's the for writing, there's the Google Season of Docs. Let me see if I can share the link. There's Google Season of Docs. Just give me a second. Google Season of Docs is a place that you want to take a look, and then there's also Outreachy that gives you an opportunity to contribute to a project by writing. And then there are companies over there in the DevRel space that usually pay people to write. So you probably see things like $100 to $300, $100 to $1,000 per article. So again, there are a lot of opportunities out there. It's just for you to be more specific to what you want. So again, it's not designed to improve your career. It's designed for you to take and then to reinvent to whatever you want to do, right? Just because you're contributing to open source doesn't mean that you're going to get a job at Google. But by being intentional and studying and putting yourself out there, get you at Google, right? If that makes sense.
All right, thank you. So I have another question offline also. So the person asks concerning the licenses, that they want to probably understand the licensing in open source. Like when you create a project on GitHub, you get to see MIT license. So they want to probably know the difference between and when to use any of the licenses there.
So in terms of license, again, I'm going to share a link. Again, license is something that we can spend like 5 hours talking about, but the TLDR of it, the shorter version of it is that every license have a way to permit people to do things, where people can behave, the amount of restrictions, the amount of ownership, and the amount of reference, right? So there's some license that will allow somebody to take your code, rewrite it, and build a company out of it, right? There's some license that will not allow that person to do that. There's some license that would allow you to there's a license in this case. The reason why people use MIT license a lot is that regardless of what you do to that software or that project that you clone from GitHub, you would always reference the author no matter what, right? So that's why if you go to some softwares that have bits of open source code, they always retain the license that they claim, which is typically the MIT license, right? Because MIT is a university, and then university, they focus a lot in terms of giving people reference in this sense, which is typically what you find in educational standpoint. So again, if you go to starting opensource.guide/starting-a-project, it's going to be more detailed about why you should use a license, and without a license, you can't classify anything as open source except you're looking for other things like events or whatever. I don't know if that answers your question.
All right. So, but are there any? This is now personal from me. So, are there any? Okay, now we talked about the licenses and probably what we can use about it. So, are there any penalties to those that fault the licenses? So, they give you a restriction and you probably didn't hit the restriction and you went ahead to probably do against the restriction. So, any penalties attached to that?
Yeah, you
Any
find
kind of scenarios you can share, like real examples that people can probably go to that, okay, this really happened, this company or this person faulted in this way and he or she got penalized.
Yeah, Google and Oracle is an example. If you've been in the software engineering space for 7, 8+ years, you realize that the initial development of Android was mostly dominated by Java, right? So basically, there's something that, again, you can probably do more research, but basically, there's something around Android and Java that gave Oracle the opportunity to sue Google, right? So, meaning Oracle had to claim for ownership in some way. So, again, because of some ignorance, some companies tend to ignore some certain things, right? For individuals, I don't really know much about it, like what are the extent of what it is. But again, like I said, typically open source, you can do whatever you want. It's not like, oh, someone's going to point their gun to your head. But if you're trying to make if you're trying to make money out of it, then be rest assured that you're probably going to get sued if you use the wrong license, right? Because typically, almost everything you use today is being powered by open source code. Like, if I'm being exact, we're looking at around 97 to 98% of code, every code in the world, between 97 to 98% are open source code. So what that means is that people are only writing proprietary code 3%, and they are reusing somebody's code 97% of the time. So you see where the whole thing is coming from. So by doing that, you need to be able to understand what ways to use that software. And most of the time, it's not exactly restricted. It's just a matter of making sure that you use it. So for example, like I said, Google is using Android to make money, right? Samsung is using Android to make money to sell phones, right? So there are a lot of ways that they're already using open source project, but they're giving credit to the owners. And also, when they make money in a way, again, they try as much as they can to donate back to the community that project is based upon. So, yes, software licensing isn't kind of very crazy in Africa, but be rest assured that if eventually you become or you succeed, you're probably going to be having a line of lawsuits waiting for you, or worse. So yeah, but I can't. You have to do your research yourself.
All right, thank you for that. So Rashid, you have another question?
No, I don't. Let me try to take more. Okay. No. I don't have a question. Thanks.
Yeah. So I would encourage you all to take a look at the links. It's very, very detailed. Towards you can figure out what you want to do there. The link is super helpful. Open source guide. It's an opportunity for you to get to know everything that it is to know in open source, and then you can be more specific on, of course, thing. But again, like I said, the typical experience here is when you're working on anything you're working on, and sometimes it's not necessarily that you have to be more specific that, oh, I need to contribute to open source. Most of the things you're probably doing, you're probably contributing to open source without knowing it. So it's an opportunity to identify that, oh, so if I'm doing this, that means I'm contributing to open source, and that could be a way for you to leverage that on your career. So what does that mean? So for example, I've been working remotely for more than half of my life, right? And how is that even possible? Like, who got to hire me before 10 years old? Nobody did, but I was able to work independently on the projects that were so big. So meaning that my experience in tech is probably more than half of my life. And that was how I was able to, I can say, oh, okay, I've had 10 to 15 years of experience in technology. The reason for that was because I was able to contribute to open source projects. Again, when you don't have the opportunity to get hired or to do stuff traditionally, by going into the open source route, it makes it a lot easier for you to, again, define your career and take ownership.
All right, thank you so much for that advice, and definitely I know this will definitely sink in. So Bibi, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So can you hear me?
Slightly. You're muffled a little bit, Maya.
I think I have to turn off the. Okay, is it better now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but not clearly.
Okay, so thank you so much, Samson, for taking your time to talk to us about open source and everything. I don't know, guys. Do you have any more questions for Samson? Is there any other thing you need clarification on? Samson, please, could you drop your Twitter link on the chat so those that want to connect you after the meeting can find you on Twitter in case they have any more thing they'd like?
Oh, okay. Yeah. You can just search on Twitter, Samson_Gotti, or just Samson Gotti. Typically, you probably would get into that. I see a question with Victoria from Victoria Anna. Why open source? How did you venture into open source? That is a very long story, and also looking at time. To kind of cut it short, I got exposed to technology very, very young. We're looking around 7 to 8 years old, and I wanted to install a Windows game on a Linux operating system, which is crazy. I didn't know it was Linux operating system. I just wanted to install a game, like when you run FIFA and the rest. So what happened? I got frustrated because it wasn't working, and I wanted to play the game. And then I started searching on the internet, and then I realized that okay, what I was using was very different from the requirement from the game. Meaning the game was Windows based, and what I was running was Linux based, right? So by doing so, that got me interested in open source, and then I started writing code, right? So I picked up Python and I started working on code, and eventually decided to create my own game in the future on the operating system that I was running. And then I shared it with the community, and then everybody loved it, and it was a lot. And to tell you how a lot it was, as of when I released the game to the App Store that the operating system was based upon, it was about 36,000 downloads, which was pretty cool, and it was very global. So that gave me a lot of opportunity. A lot of people reaching out from different part of the globe, and I started building my skills from there. And then everything to today that I am experiencing or enjoying in the sense, and or all the things that most of you probably would know are all coming from that part. So the opportunity to get to stay in open source and work in open source has not just improved my skills, but also has improved the level of connections that I have in the industry. So in this case, I'll be able to see, I made a tweet last week saying that I've been able to see people that I was contributing to on some projects going to become CEOs of companies, right? And also like very big leadership. So meaning it's a lot easier for me to like navigate between companies because there are high opportunity or there are high chances that somebody there might have seen my work somewhere because again, it's very open and I was contributing to a very popular project back like 10, 11, 12 years ago. So yeah, so that's kind of the short version of it. And that's why I stayed on open source.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Samson. Thank you. Okay, that question was from, I'm trying to stay up my question. So that question was from Victoria. Victoria, I hope that answers your question. So do you have any more questions? We are past 10. We have 8 more minutes to go on the call. It's 30 seconds an hour. Do you have any more questions? If there are more, you can drop them on Slack. And if it is something we have to research something for, we reach out to him for. If it's something we can answer on the workspace, we get the answers and possibly link. Okay, again, thank you very much, Samson, for coming on the call. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the community before we call tonight?
Yeah, the only thing I would just say is probably read a lot, right? Try as much as you can to do research. Information is key. So that's all I would say.
Okay, I would also see as a bit like you to add that. Okay, first there are different categories of technical writers present. There are the senior technical writers, the beginners, and the intermediate. So for
Okay.
you, how would you think? What would you say? How would you encourage or encourage this different set of people to find a balance in the open source?
I don't think I can hear you. I'm struggling to hear what you're saying.
Just a minute. Just a minute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Sounding like a podcast.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm saying that there are different spheres of technical writers present now. We have the beginners, we have the seniors, we have those that are intermediates. So my question for you now is, what would you be your advice for the different spheres of technical writers present here? Like, how would you advise each and every one of them to find a balance in the open source space?
First, they need to forget their title, the seniority aspect of it, like whether they're junior or they're senior. I don't think in the space of open source people care about that. So everyone is a technical writer. So so that means that you should be able to be open or re-educating yourself. And by doing so, that improves your skill set regardless of how long you've been doing technical writing, because technology changes every 6 months. That is typically the almost software cycle of most projects, right? Changing in 6 months or something is technically very different. If it's programming language, you're looking about 2 to 3 years. So that means that you need to constantly update yourself. Like I said, I think in this sense, that means you need to be able to always seek out for information. You need to be always to write more. Again, the more you write, the more you improve. Also, it means you need to often try something that makes you uncomfortable. Try to leave your comfort zone. The reason why I'm saying that is because when you're hired to be a technical writer, you will often get pushed to do something that you're not knowledgeable about. So, meaning in this case, you're writing about your company's product. What if the product is not something that you can use easily? That is where the thing is coming from. So, again, those are kind of my advice, regardless of whatever skill, whatever level you are or identify as.
Thank you very much, Samson. That was really helpful. And thank you again, everyone, for joining today's call. If there is nothing else, I'll be ending the call in the next 3 minutes. You can just unmute your mic and say thank you to Samson.
Thank you, Mr. Samson, for this class.
Thank you.
Thank you.